The Oracle Network. I am always looking for my new favorite true crime podcast, and I think I found it. Crime Juicy Cocktail Hour is an incredibly entertaining true crime podcast. This female narrated podcast covers true crime, cults, and controversies. There's a new episode every week, and they each have a unique and multidisciplinary perspective. One episode I found really interesting was called My Brain Made Me Do It. In that episode, they explore the insanity defense, the science of psychopathy, and particular killers considered psychopaths like the happy face killer.
It's a 5-star rated podcast on Apple Podcasts. I like that each episode is around 30 to 60 minutes, the perfect amount of time to listen while I do some chores or I'm driving.
They just wrapped up their first season, and I'm already ready for season 2. So find Crime Juicy Cocktail Hour on your favorite podcast app or click the link in the show notes. As you guys probably know, I like a good scare.
Scary movies is probably my favorite genre.
And you can't help but get a little on edge when you listen to a really good true crime podcast. But did you know there's a whole world of creepy entertainment on YouTube? And I've been really getting into a channel called Disturbed Lore. Each episode tells a unique and mysterious story over the course of 5 to 10 minutes. The episodes embrace a creative, artistic approach with different styles of art, actors, and narration.
Wow, that sounds so fascinating.
An episode that really stands out to me is called My First Time. A teenage girl is home alone for the weekend, and the audience gets a glimpse into her mind as she plans her first kill. Almost as a teenager might plan a party, we get to see the character painstakingly prepare her first time, her first murder.
That's so creepy. I can't wait to check out Disturbed Lore.
So grab a friend, leave the lights on, and find Disturbed Lore on YouTube or click the link in the show notes. Everybody, welcome back to another week, another episode of Not Your Normal Murder. My name's Mary.
And I'm Deirdre.
And this is part 2 of the murder of Hae Min Lee and the case against Adnan Syed. If you did not listen to the first part, or if you're just not familiar with the case, please go back and listen to the first part. That's where we really cover all the major points of the case. And today we're going to get more into the nitty-gritty details, so you definitely don't want to be lost. Today we start off with talking about how Jay eventually was charged for his role by his own admission in Hae's death. Technically, you do not have to have a lawyer if you have not been charged with anything. And Jay was not charged with anything until the September after Hae's death. The police started having taped interviews with Jay in February, 7 months before. Perhaps they held off on charging him until they got all the information out of him that they thought that they could. They might have been scared that if they charged him with accessory to murder, that he would stop talking. According to The Hollywood Reporter, once Jay was charged with something, the lead prosecutor on Adnan's case, Kevin Urich, spoke to his defense lawyer friend about Jay, and she represented him pro bono. No public defender.
So I just personally find that a huge conflict of interest that the prosecutor on your case where you're charged with accessory to murder gets their friend to represent you in court. What do you think?
That's a huge conflict of interest because obviously at times people who are friends are going to be on cases against each other. But obviously this shows that the prosecutor is biased towards Jay to go out of his way to find Jay a good lawyer.
Yeah, and the fact that they waited 8 months after Hae's death to charge him with anything, I mean, I just find that like to be unheard of, because I understand them not charging him right away to try to get information out of him, but like 8 months is excessive to me.
I actually completely disagree. I don't think it makes any sense to wait 8 months to try to get more information out of him, because I think that if you arrested him right away, and then I think you would have more leverage to get him to turn on Adnan if he was trying to save his own butt.
Yeah, that's true too. But maybe they were afraid once he got a lawyer, the lawyer would tell him to not talk. But then that could be part of an agreement. Like,
yeah,
plead me down to probation and I'll tell you everything you want to know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would have had a lot of room to work, because technically, I mean, you probably could have charged him with murder. I mean, I feel like you could have made just as much of a case against him as there is against Adnan based on the circumstantial evidence.
I feel like accessory is like the least that they could have charged him with, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he could have been considered a co-conspirator.
Yeah, so I think that if they had arrested him right away and charged him with the worst that they could have mustered at the time, and then gave him a plea agreement to turn on Adnan, and they would plead him down to accessory after the fact or whatever, and he was going to get a good punishment, like minimal jail time or no jail time, I think that would have been a more successful situation, to be honest. So I really can't fathom the idea of why they waited 8 months. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, I agree.
But Jay would end up pleading guilty to 1 count of accessory after the fact of murder, based on what he admitted to police that he knew ahead of time that Adnan was going to kill Hae. He could have been charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The judge who was assigned to Jay's case was well known in Baltimore for giving lighter sentences to young offenders. And Jay was just 19 years old when he pled guilty. Jay was sentenced with probation for his role in the crime.
Which is crazy for accessory after the fact to murder.
I think that if you actually knew that somebody was going to be murdered and you didn't do anything about it, and according to him, it wasn't just like they were joking about it. Because we have all, as gauche as it is, we have all joked about killing somebody, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We all have, like, oh my God, I could strangle her. We have all done it. By his own admission, it was not that case. By his own admission, it was a serious conversation. It was planned ahead of time. I really don't think probation is appropriate for this.
Yeah, or like accessory after the fact when he knew ahead of time by his own admission.
Because if he really knew, if he had just told one person, if he had gone and told a teacher, if he had warned Hae, there are so many things he could have done to have stopped this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Adnan's family immediately started the appeal process and started with firing his defense lawyer, Cristina Gutierrez. They believed Cristina did not do a good job of defending Adnan. And Cristina was actually disbarred 1 year after Adnan's trial due to unrelated circumstances. Cristina would pass away in 2004. Adnan had lost an appeal in 2013, but based on the evidence that was discovered in the podcast Serial, Adnan's team filed a new appeal. Adnan's family friend, Chaudhry, played a huge role in his appeal process. She is very close to the family and calls Adnan's mom Auntie. She is an attorney and advocates for his innocence. She, along with his appeals lawyer, Justin Brown, and another attorney who has taken an interest in the case, Susan Simpson, have been working on trying to earn Adnan his release since his conviction. The family has also hired 2 private investigators who have been trying to discover what really happened on the day that Hae died. Because what the prosecution proposes is just not possible. And I understand, like, obviously they're trying to find out what really happened because that's their best bet at this point to get Adnan out of prison. But I also do like that they're trying to find out what happened, because I feel like the face of this case is Adnan. I feel like so much of the media focus is not on Hae anymore.
Like, none of it is. It's like she's forgotten. It's just his case now.
Yeah. None of it is about okay, well, then what really happened to her? How do we actually get her justice? So I understand that they have their own motives for getting the private investigators, but I also think it is really great because I do think that Hay deserves justice, and I would like to know what really happened that day.
Yeah, me too. It's like a huge mystery that, like, I wonder if we'll ever know in this lifetime.
Well, somebody knows.
Well, yeah.
Somebody who's still alive knows, so there's still a chance.
Right.
So the whole point is to figure out what happened, because what the prosecution says happened, there is no way it happened. It just didn't happen. Not only is the time frame extremely tight, but Jay's story has changed so many times between all the police interviews and in the years since Adnan's conviction. Jay has said that his story changed so many times because he was a drug dealer in the area and was afraid of police prosecution. In order for the prosecution's theory of the actual murder to be accurate, Adnan had to speak to Hay after school, ask her for a ride, and then convince her to drive him to Best Buy. Hay bought some snacks at a concession stand at 2:25. That is a fact. Hay had to walk out of the store, get in her car, and drive away. In perfect conditions, the drive to Best Buy is 4 minutes. So let's say that she drove away from the concession stand at 2:26, arriving at Best Buy by 2:30 exactly. Adnan had to have strangled her to death and put her in the trunk of her own car and walk to the entrance of the store and call Jay to come pick him up in 6 minutes. And that is only if there were no holdup driving. So, is this plausible?
Which I think we discussed last week that it's not really plausible.
Right.
Especially because we don't even know if there's a phone there.
It's technically possible. But, I mean, also, like, what woman gets into her car and then drives away, like, 1 second later? I mean, you know, like, we're putting on the radio, adjusting our seat, like...
Well, also something I thought about is, like, so she's at the concession stand, and obviously Adnan didn't go in with her because the employee there would have remembered that, or they would have, like, known about it. So... Right. He's just sitting in the car chilling. Like, how could he have taken the chance that somebody would have seen him?
Well, and then I still just can't get past he killed her in broad daylight in a public parking lot.
Mm-hmm, yeah. In under 6 minutes.
And then moved her body to the trunk in broad daylight in a public parking lot.
Yeah, that's the weirdest part, is moving her to the trunk in 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, and there wasn't even really a reason to.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have put her in a position in the car so that nobody would have known unless they were really, like, on top of the car looking into the window. Because we've covered cases like that.
Right.
A major part of the prosecution's case revolved around Adnan's cell phone records. There were 5 different cell phone calls on Adnan's phone that day. And the police, when looking at his records, believed that the only possible call that could have been the one where Adnan called Jay to come pick him up was the call at 2:36. On the records, it originally showed that the call came in on a cell tower by Jen's house, which would have matched their stories because they both testified that Jay was at her house at that time. However, it was later discovered that there was a typo on the record and that the call actually pinged off of a tower that was much further west than her house, which means he was not at Jen's house at that time, showing an inconsistency in their stories.
And also, I wanted to say, like, his cell phone records show that that incoming call was from a payphone, but I guess that back then in 1999, like, you couldn't tell which payphone came from which location or something. So
yeah,
it could have been any payphone anywhere in that zip code. And again, you don't know who's on the other end of that line because it is a payphone.
I just wonder, is this the first time that cell phone records were used in a court of law?
I know, I was wondering about that too, because
they were so rare.
So this is so long ago, and it seems like they don't really have much information.
Yeah, so I feel like this was obviously a very new, if this wasn't the first case it was used in, it was one of the first. And I don't think they really understood what they were looking at when they were using the data.
Right.
The prosecution also pointed to Adnan's cell phone records to prove that he buried Hay at Lincoln Park that evening. They believe that Jay and Adnan were burying Hay between 6 and 8 p.m. that evening, but based on lividity, we already know that this is not possible. Her lividity shows that she was laying flat for 10 to 12 hours, not curled up in the trunk of a car. The police made a phone call to Adnan and it pinged off of a tower near Lincoln Park, which matches what they believed the story was. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't she basically not even buried?
Yeah, it was like a half-hearted attempt. Like, she was kind of buried, but kind of wasn't, because she was sticking, because when the person that found her, Alonzo Sellers, her leg was sticking out of the ground. Like, she was kind of...
So it was a very shallow grave.
It's almost as if the person gave up, which they probably did because it was January in Baltimore and the ground was probably frozen.
It doesn't take you 2 hours to dig that shallow of a grave either.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, according to the cell phone records, Adnan placed an outgoing call to his friend Krista around 5:36 p.m., and that pinged off of a tower near where Jay says that he left Hay's car. But let's go back to when the police interviewed Jay about these cell calls. It was during his second taped interview on March 15th. Jay's original story to police did not match what these records said, but the second interview did match what the records said. Jay's interview with police started at 3:05 p.m. However, they did not start the recording until 6:20 p.m. So what were they talking about for those 3 hours? Also, if you're going to record an interview, why are you picking and choosing which parts of the interview to keep?
I know that completely discredits the whole interview.
Yeah.
Like, either record it all or don't record anything, but it just is more suspicious to record bits and pieces.
Yeah, especially 3 hours. 3 hours. That is a very serious conversation.
I don't have anything to say to anybody for 3 hours. How could you sit there for 3 hours and talk before you even start the interview?
A detective on the Heyman Lee case told HBO in an interview that they believe, when talking to a witness, that the first story is always a lie, and the second story is a little less of a lie, which is why they believe Jay's second story more. Which... What?
I know.
With what evidence?
That means that they're not reliable at all.
Yeah. Also, that completely contradicts how memories actually work. Because, okay, yeah, like, if you were actively trying to lie, then yes, but that is the opposite of memory, because the first time you tell a story is the most clear in your mind, and then every time from there, your memory is of your last memory, and that's how it starts to get clouded. So actually, the more you tell that story over and over, the more confused you're going to get.
And that's how stories get so embellished over time.
Yeah, and you totally believe it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
During that second taped interview is when Jay tells the police the timeline about how the phone calls fit into the timeline. He and Adnan go to the mall, then he drops Adnan back at school between 1 and 1:30, and goes to Jen's house where Adnan calls him at 2:36 to come and get him from Best Buy, where Adnan tells him he murdered Hay and shows him her body in her trunk. At 3 p.m., they drop Hay's car at a park and go buy weed. He says that they call Adnan's friend Nisha, a call at 3:32 on the record, an outgoing call. And he says that they were at a golf course, but the cell phone tower pings are near Best Buy. You know, another thing I have to wonder, though, is, again, like, this is a teenage high school boy who is presumably never killed before, and he just is chilling with a body in his trunk while he goes and buys weed.
Yeah, it's very cold.
But why would you want to possibly draw more attention to yourself? What if you get busted for buying weed or possession of weed, and then they find out, oh, you have a body in your car?
Well, they parked her car somewhere and then went and bought weed. But yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, why would you go and buy weed on the same day you committed a murder?
While you're still in the process of taking care of it.
Yeah.
It just does not fit to me a young teenage boy who is not a completely heartless, cold stone serial killer.
Well, yeah, and also because he's acting like he's got all the time in the world. And like, if it were me personally, like, I mean, obviously I'm not going to go and murder somebody, but if I did, I would be freaking out until I got rid of the body. I'm not going to go and park it somewhere and go buy weed.
Yeah, I'd want to get it over with. I want to go buy weed and then go lounge around a friend's house and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
There was another outgoing call at 4:27 p.m., and Jay says that this was as he was dropping Adnan off at practice at school, but these cell phone tower pings were not near the school. He said he dropped Adnan off at 4:45 p.m., calls her friend Krista, where the cell phone records indicate that Jay was near the Park and Go, where Hayes' car was. He said he picks Adnan back up at 6, where they bury Hayes' body, and they receive the incoming call from police at 6:24. Cell phone pings near Lincoln Park. But after trial, it is discovered that there is a major issue with this story. The entire story revolves around the cell phone tower pings. On the cover page of the records sent over by AT&T, the records used at trial, it was in big letters that the outgoing calls only are reliable for location. Incoming calls were not considered reliable for location. The only call that shows Adnan's guilt, the come and get me call and the Lincoln Park call, were incoming calls. The other calls, such as Jay saying that they were by the school when they weren't, were outgoing calls, which were reliable for location, which means Jay's story, which he tells police and which he testifies to at trial, is inaccurate, at least based on the outgoing call record. This was on the discovery used at the first trial, which Adnan's first lawyer had access to and either did not notice it or did not bring it up as a way to impeach Jay's testimony. This was another way that Adnan's legal team believed that his original counsel failed him. And I think that she just didn't see it. I don't think that she read through the discovery, to be quite honest. Not all of it.
I don't think so either. I think she saw the cell phone records, like skimmed through them. Like, it's on a cover page of a fax, and I used to work in an office, and I know that people rarely look at cover pages of faxes. So, I mean, yeah. But, you know, she's his lawyer, and she needs to look through every page of discovery, so I'm not really cutting her any slack on that one.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. I think she just didn't even look at the cover page. And that's a pity because obviously nobody looked at it. Or if the prosecution saw that, then they didn't bring it up.
Yeah, I feel like she probably just, like, saw a cover letter, and honestly, she probably just threw it aside.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, it's a cover letter. What could that possibly mean? Another point that is brought up for Adnan's appeal was the Asia McClain alibi, which Adnan's first lawyer did not even look into. In March of 2000, right after Adnan's conviction, Asia wrote an affidavit. Her affidavit, in her own handwriting, states that on January 13th, 1999, she was in the library at school when she saw Adnan. She knew the time, 2:20 p.m., She said she and Adnan had a lengthy conversation, about 15 to 20 minutes, and it only ended when her boyfriend came to pick her up at 2:40 p.m.
That conversation, if it did happen on that day, that completely blows the prosecution's case out of the water because, you know, that's the exact time that they're driving to Best Buy. He's murdering Hay. He's putting her in the trunk, and he calls Jay. Literally the exact time.
I think that the prosecution really backed themselves into the corner by worrying about these phone calls so much and trying to force the phone calls to make a timeline, because the phone calls don't make any sense, and we know now because they're inaccurate, but they never made any sense to begin with, so they tried so hard to come up with this story.
They're fitting square pegs into round holes. Like,
yeah.
It just never made sense to begin with. Because, yeah, the timeline was so tight. It was so all over the place. Like, they have Jay and Adnan driving, like, here, there, everywhere. Like, they're all over the place. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Based on the cell phone tower pings, they're in this location. They're in that location. They're in this location. Like...
And now it's too late to change their narrative. Now it's too late to say, oh, well, she didn't die in that 6-minute time period. She died later in the day. She died a week later. She died 3 weeks later, because we don't actually know when she died.
Right.
But they've already put all their eggs in that basket, and it's too late to come up with another story. But the story that they did come up with does not make any sense.
Exactly.
10 years go by, and the PIs on Adnan's team contacted Asia and asked her to testify for his appeal. So much time had passed, and Asia was hesitant to get involved. She contacted the prosecutor on the case, thinking that he would give her good advice about what to do. She tells HBO in an interview that the prosecutor told her that Adnan was guilty, that they had cell phone records proving this, and an eyewitness who was guilty, and an eyewitness who admitted to helping him bury the body. In 2012, Adnan's lawyer presented Asia's affidavit at a hearing for post-conviction relief. Asia declined to testify at this hearing, but the prosecutor did testify. He stated that in the phone call with Asia, she said that she only wrote that affidavit because of the pressure from Adnan's family. However, since this hearing, Asia has said publicly that she never recanted her story. She claims on the phone call the prosecutor lied to her, saying there was DNA evidence linking Adnan to the crime. She didn't come forward until listening to the Serial podcast 4 years later. I don't understand, how is this conversation between her and the prosecutor, how is he able to testify on it? Like, isn't it almost basically hearsay?
Well, yeah, and he's like testifying in a case that he prosecuted. Like, what? It's like, that like boggles my mind.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. If she really did recant her story, for somebody else to say, oh yeah, she recanted the story, shouldn't she, either she has to come to court to do it, or you don't bring that up.
Or she signs another affidavit recanting her first affidavit. But since she signed in front of a notary that first affidavit, that should take precedence over a phone call she supposedly had with a prosecutor.
Yeah, that's true. Because that, like, you are swearing to that. She didn't swear to this phone call.
Yeah.
So after she listened to the Serial podcast, Asia comes forward to Adnan's defense team, and she writes a second affidavit. Her new affidavit states that she was never pressured to write the original affidavit, and that the prosecutor convinced her to stay out of the case. Publicly, the second prosecutor on the case, Thuru Vignarajah, has said that Asia is a weakness for the defense's case. Since this hearing, Asia has published a book called Confessions of a Serial Alibi.
Which I really wish she hadn't written that book, because I feel like once you write a book and are trying to make money off of a book, you kind of lose your credibility.
Yeah, if he ever does get another day in court, that's going to be some good material for the prosecution to make her look like maybe she just wanted a piece of the media attention. She wanted money. And also, you know, if she says one thing on stand that is slightly different than what she said in the book, then they're going to call her out on that.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that. It's just, her alibi of him is already so weak, in my opinion, because it's just completely based on her word, and there's no way to verify that she was even in the library that day. So it's like her word against everybody else's, and then on top of that, she writes a book about it. Like, it's just, I feel like it discredits her a bit.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, like, we're glad that she is doing what she thinks is right, and she has come forward and she's stuck with her story. But we're just saying that it might actually hurt his case, possibly. Mm-hmm. Another issue brought into question about the timeline and what actually happened on January 13th, 1989, has to do with one of Jen's sorority sisters, Christy. Christy was questioned by police about what she did on that day. Christy testified at trial stating that she got home for the evening that day at 5:15. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. Jay was at her door, and he asked if he could come inside. Christy stated that Adnan was with Jay, but she was not introduced. She said while they were there, Adnan didn't speak at all except to ask how to get rid of a high. She testified that he then received a phone call and he's panicking, saying stuff like, "What do I do? What should I say? They're going to come talk to me." And Adnan leaves shortly after that phone call. This could have been the 6:24 p.m. phone call that Adnan receives from the police. However, if this is the police calling, why would he be panicked, asking, "What should I do? What should I say?" Plus, looking at the timing of all of this, Adnan receives the phone call at 6:24 p.m. He and Jay have about 90 minutes then to go get shovels, drive to get Hayes' car, go to Lincoln Park, bury her body, dump Hayes' car, drop Jay off at the mall and ditch his shovels, and have Adnan meet his dad at the mosque by 8 p.m. And why are Jay and Adnan hanging out at a friend's house while they have a dead body in the trunk of a car somewhere?
Which goes back to what we were saying. Like, why are you smoking weed, hanging out, chilling when there's a dead body in the trunk of the car?
Plus, okay, now I am really confused because I thought the police thought that he was physically at Lincoln Park burying the body from 6 to 8. But now you're saying he's sitting around at 6:24. He hasn't even gotten started yet?
Yeah, so they're contradicting themselves because first they're saying, oh, these cell phone tower pings prove he's at Lincoln Park at 6:24. But then you bring somebody on the stand saying, oh, no, he was at my house at 6:24. So make up your mind, dude. You're contradicting yourself on the stand at trial.
Which timeline are you going with? Because they contradict each other.
Like, if they really wanted their case to be made, then they shouldn't have had Chris to testify because she totally muddies the water here.
Yeah, why did they bring her in to testify? What does she actually provide that helps the prosecution in any way?
I actually think she's more of a defense witness than a prosecution witness because she's creating reasonable doubt here. How could he have been burying Hay at 6:24 if he's at her house at 6:24?
I think that they must have thought that it made him look guilty for him to be supposedly saying, "What do I do? What should I say? They're going to come talk to me." But if I was, 17 years old and somebody told me that my ex was missing and that the police wanted to talk to me, I would also be nervous about that.
Mm-hmm. I would be nervous now.
Yeah. I'm one of those people where police, they scare me.
Yeah.
It just freaks me out. I don't want to talk to them. I would be scared in this situation. So I don't really see, you're right. I don't know why they brought her in as a prosecution witness. It really doesn't make any sense. And again, he's just sitting around, lounging around, getting high, talking about how high he is. Well, he has a missing girl in the trunk of her car, just sitting around, just waiting to be discovered.
Right.
Going to Christy's house is an inconsistency in Jay's story because he first told police that he and Adnan were getting food when the police called, and then he changes his story to that they were at Christy's house. Jen, who was also a major player in the case against Adnan, told HBO that she didn't know that Jay's story ever changed until she listened to Serial. This goes to show another way that Adnan's trial lawyer was inadequate, because she could have used the different stories in the different recorded police interviews to impeach Jay. When Christy testified, she stated that the only way that she knew it was January 13th when Adnan and Jay came to her house was because the detective told her it was, and because she had a conference that day. Later, Adnan's private investigators showed her school records, which showed that she had a 3-week mini-mester course every Wednesday night in January. She passed the course with a B. If she had missed 1 out of only 3 classes, she would not have passed the class, which proves that she was not home that evening. So why would Jay lie about going to Christy's house on the night that they buried Hayes' body? The cell phone call that Adnan received that night at Christy's house was an incoming call, and the incoming calls were not reliable for location. Jen told HBO that she believes the first story Jay told her was the closest to the truth because he told her within an hour or two of it all happening. She too only knows the date because that is what the police told her. Once she was also shown Christy's class schedule, she had no idea what the truth was or what she remembered. Detective Ritz, who was one of the main detectives in investigating Hayes' murder, had been involved in 3 other cases where there had been an exoneration or the case had been overturned. In one particular case, the woman who named the killer came forward later and claimed that Detective Ritz told them that he would arrest them for drug crimes and have their children taken away from them if they didn't make the statements fingering the killer. And I feel like that's a pretty strong track record, though. 3 cases.
Yeah, that's really hard to ignore. Like, if there's 3, there's probably 4. And what was the 4th case? Adnan's? Hayes?
Are there more people behind bars who shouldn't be?
Mm-hmm.
That's scary. That's honestly scary that 3 cases there was an exoneration or overturned. And that apparently, according to these people, he really gets too involved and pressures them into saying things that aren't true.
Well, it just shows that he, is more concerned about having a closed case than having justice.
The prosecutor, Theoru, was asked why they never tested the DNA evidence, to which he responded that it was not his job to test DNA evidence. But if you were so sure that Adnan is guilty, wouldn't the DNA just strengthen your case? What is he? That is literally his job. What do you mean? That's literally your job.
I think he's being facetious and he's, saying literally. In a literal term, it's not his job. It's the lab's job. It's your job to make sure it's tested.
Yeah. That'd be like a patient coming to me asking for a blood test and me being like, that's not my job. Well, yeah, because it is not literally my job to poke you with a needle, but yeah, I am the person that has to make it happen.
Exactly. Yeah, I think he's being smart.
Another item to consider was the fingerprint taken off of Hayes' rearview mirror. To this day, it has not been run through any sort of database for fingerprints. When Hay was found, there was a diamond-shaped mark on her body, which was blanched and not matching her other lividity. Experts state that something diamond-shaped would have had to have been pressed against her body from 12:30 to 2:30 a.m., but nothing diamond-shaped was found near her body. Since the prosecution believes that Adnan buried her between 6 and 8 p.m., this is not possible when considering how her body was found. No, I mean, obviously she was laying on something flat. She was laying in a flat place on top of something diamond-shaped for 12 hours before she was buried.
Right. It honestly blows my mind that he's still in prison. What am I missing? I feel like there must be something I'm missing here because I, literally don't understand how a judge doesn't take a look at this and exonerate him.
Yeah, because what the prosecution said happened could not have happened.
Yeah.
Just the fact that there's no way that she was in a trunk before she was buried, that alone completely blows the timeline and the theory out.
Yeah.
She was not cramped in a trunk. She was laying somewhere for at least 12 hours before she was buried. And if he did kill her that day, he did not bury her that day because he wasn't out there at 3 a.m. burying her body.
Yeah, he was at home in bed at his parents' house.
Okay, so I am a major caffeine addict, and I mean, it's amazing. I love it. But there is one drawback. I mean, you just cannot get your teeth as white as I want to. And I feel like I've tried everything. I've done the LED lights. They're basically novelty items. I've done those strips, but they neglect the gum lines, crevices, and molars, and they always just leave my teeth so gummy. I've done the charcoal toothpaste, but it's abrasive and it wears down my enamel. And just like the regular whitening toothpaste, it just doesn't work. I just don't know what is going on.
Yeah, and as somebody that has worked in the dental field for years, just brushing your teeth and flossing your teeth and using mouthwash, that's not enough. Like, it keeps your teeth clean, but it doesn't keep them white. But the number one product recommended by dentists is the custom fitted tray. They are, however, very, very costly, as it requires the dentist to make them by hand using a model of your teeth. And I've actually worked in dental offices before, where we did the whitening, and that is expensive. Patients hardly ever do it because it was costly. But with Smile Brilliance Lab Direct Process, you can have custom fitted teeth whitening trays at a fraction of the price without a single visit to the dentist. Using an exact model of your teeth, Smile Brilliance Lab technicians will handcraft your trays to ensure the best possible results.
That sounds so amazing. And it's so easy to do. You simply order the system at smilebrilliant.com using the coupon code NYNM30 for 30% off. Make your dental impressions at home and return them to Smile Brilliant using the prepaid envelope provided. In a matter of a week, Smile Brilliant will have your trays back in the mail. So make sure you go to smilebrilliant.com or click the link in the show notes and make sure to use code NYNM30 for 30% off now. Adnan's defense team appealed the case again, asking that his conviction be overturned. They claimed that his lawyer at his first trial was so incompetent, made so many mistakes, and that she failed to contact someone who could have alibied him. Adnan was granted a hearing to have his case overturned or retried. This was granted based on two things: his original defense lawyer failing to use an alibi witness, and that the cell phone tower records have been unreliable data. In 2016, a judge ordered a new trial for Adnan. Adnan's conviction was vacated, as if it had never happened. They agreed that his first counsel was negligent on not contacting Asia, and that the cell phone tower information being inaccurate affected the outcome of the trial. But Adnan was immediately rearrested for Hayes' death and once again denied bail for the new trial. The state appealed the judge's decision of the case being overturned, saying the defense did not have a right to attack the cell tower issue and that the court never should have heard this argument. And again, why is he not being allowed to go out on bail? He's literally not a flight issue, at least not out of the country, because he doesn't have a passport at this point.
Yeah, it's been more than 10 years. His passport's expired.
Yes, he's not leaving the country.
And I'm sure, once again, his parents and family members and everybody, would put up their houses for him, so...
And also, at this point, this case was so famous by 2016 that if he had gotten to go home, there would have probably been media outside his house day and night.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
What is interesting and unique about Adnan's case is that the second prosecutor, Thuru, abdicated his role as a prosecutor and went to private practice in 2017. However, he pro bono stayed at the prosecutor on the case despite not working for the state's attorney's office. So what they're saying is he left, but he had this little caveat where he still kind of worked for them just so he could work on this case.
Yeah, and I just don't really understand the semantics of that. Being a prosecutor is a big deal, okay? That's a very important position to hold, and the fact that a lawyer can be like, oh, I'm going to pro bono be a prosecutor for one case, how's that even legal? That, to me, that's like working as a surgeon at a hospital that you don't have privileges at. How is that allowed? And that shows, and doing it for free.
Yeah.
To me, that shows a personal vendetta. The fact that he can't, give it up to the next prosecutor. He's so emotionally invested in this case.
Yeah.
That has to stay on for this one case for free.
Yeah, it shouldn't have been allowed. I think they probably were excited that they got to have a prosecutor work for free. That's probably all they cared about.
Yeah, but I feel like there should be some sort of rule somewhere that only people that are actually prosecutors should be able to prosecute cases. Because then what's to stop in the future having random lawyers prosecute every case? I feel like that would completely discredit our justice system, because you're either a prosecutor or you're not. How can some random lawyer prosecute a case because they want to do it?
Well, and the point of the prosecutors, you're supposed to be working for the best interest of the people. And obviously, this is, he's very overly involved in this case. He's doing what's in the best interest for himself because he's so obsessed with the case.
Exactly.
When seen outside of the courthouse after a hearing about Adnan's case, Thuru refused to answer any questions from HBO. The court ruled to uphold the overturned conviction, and in their decision, the court seemed as if they were arguing Adnan's innocence. Here is an excerpt from the decision. The state's case was weakest when it came to the time it theorized that Syed killed Hay. As the post-conviction court highlighted in its opinion, Wild's own testimony conflicted with the state's timeline of the murder. Moreover, there was no video surveillance outside the Best Buy parking lot placing Hay and Syed together at the Best Buy parking lot during the afternoon of the murder. No eyewitness testimony placed Syed and Hay together leaving school or at the Best Buy parking lot. No eyewitness testimony, video surveillance, or confession of the actual murder. No forensic evidence linking Syed to the act of strangling Hay or putting Hay's body in the trunk of her car. And no records from the Best Buy payphone documenting a phone call to Syed's cell phone. In short, at trial, the state adduced no direct evidence of the exact time that Hay was killed, the location where she was killed, the acts of the killer immediately before and after Hay was strangled, and of course, the identity of the person who killed Hay. That's a pretty concise way to put that all together, though.
I know, and where's the lie? You know what I mean? Like, everything is straight facts.
Yeah, there is no direct evidence of anything.
Everything is completely just assumed at this point based on the testimony of somebody whose story changes every time you talk to him.
If you throw anything about Jay out the window, you just pretend like he doesn't exist, there is literally nothing connecting Adnan to this case, and at this point, you cannot believe a word out of Jay's mouth.
Yeah.
And especially him having 3-hour meetings with detectives before actually having a documented interview. There's just so much reasonable doubt that the prosecution even had good intentions to this case.
Yeah, that's true.
The decision also said that if Asia had testified, it would have caused reasonable doubt in the mind of at least one juror. After this, the state offered Adnan a deal: plead guilty to the crime and no Alford plea. Plus, he would have to serve 4 more years on top of what he had already served. Hay's family very strongly believes that Adnan is guilty of Hay's murder, and they are pushing to keep Adnan in prison. Adnan refused the deal because pleading guilty would be him saying that he had lied to everyone for the past 20 years about his innocence. He is not afraid of the prosecution or prison because he has nothing that can be taken away from him anymore, because he's already lost everything. I also think it's so ridiculous, though, that they wouldn't even let him have an Alford plea.
It's vindictive, in my opinion.
It's vindictive, yeah.
You're getting what you want. Somebody went to prison for her murder, and you're saying case closed.
I mean, I know it's not really fair to compare to another case because literally it is just one person's opinion, one prosecutor's opinion compared to another prosecutor's opinion. But like the staircase that, I forget what his first name is, but he's one of the Peterson killers. You know, the Netflix documentary, The Staircase?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he eventually gets an Alford plea, and you know, obviously we do not have time to get into that whole thing, but he was the only person that was present with her when she died. So whether she died of an accident or a murder, he was the only person that was there. And we have absolutely no reason to believe that, and we have no evidence that supports that Adnan was with Hay when she died. There's no evidence that supports that. So why would you give an Alford plea? And I know, I guess this is 2 completely different people, but it just blows my mind that one person who was physically there when a murder or when a death took place, gets an Alford plea, and Adnan can't get an Alford plea when there is absolutely no direct or even really circumstantial evidence that connects them to the case.
True.
On March 8th, 2018, the state won another appeal against the overturned conviction. A 7-judge panel ruled 4-3 to reinstate Adnan's conviction.
Which I honestly can't even believe that's a thing.
No,
like,
I remember the day this happened, and I didn't realize that that was legal.
I don't see how it is, dude. That's like a in my mind, that's almost like double jeopardy.
That is double jeopardy. That's 100% double jeopardy.
How can you be convicted of something, then have it vacated, and then being like, JK, actually, we're going to reinstate the conviction. We're going to completely undermine that other judge's authority.
Yeah, what's the point of being able to overturn a conviction then?
Yeah.
And the whole point of double jeopardy is so that you never, when somebody is found not guilty, they don't have to spend the rest of their life looking over their shoulder waiting for the police to come and arrest them again for the same crime.
Well, I mean, it isn't double jeopardy because he wasn't exonerated. His case was vacated. So he could be tried again. But I don't see how you can say that a case is vacated and then undo that. Like, he should have had to go through another trial. They shouldn't have been able to just reinstate it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having to go through another trial. I do think that at this point, I think it makes sense because of how long it's been going on.
You are allowed a trial by jury. And so if you have a judge saying that your original trial was vacated, it should not be allowed to be reinstated. You should have to get another trial. Like, I think that this 7-judge panel, 4-3 to reinstate Adnan's conviction is crap. That shouldn't even be a thing.
Also, it wasn't even a unanimous decision, and a jury has to be unanimous, so why do these judges get to not be unanimous?
Yeah, if they weren't unanimous, then he should have been able to get another trial.
Yeah, it's just... I remember the day that happened, and I was just shocked because I can't believe that is allowed. That is a terrible loophole in the system, and that is not fair to anybody.
Yeah.
So currently, at the time that we're talking, Adnan is in prison and is still convicted of Hae Min Lee's murder, and no new advances are known to have happened on his case since. And now, we're going to switch gears a bit and discuss alternative theories to what could have happened to Hae Min Lee on January 13th, 1999. The first theory to bring up is that her current boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, Don Kleindienst, murdered Hae. The police failed to investigate Don closely, and that is a huge flaw in their investigation. If you remember, Hae was supposed to hang out with Don that evening after picking up her cousins. And Don was supposedly at work on that day. And when questioned by police later, he said he got off work at 6 p.m. and was home by 7 p.m. However, the police were calling him all evening looking for her, and they didn't get in touch with him until 1:30 in the morning. What was he doing all that time? If he was supposed to be hanging out with Hae, shouldn't he have been by the phone waiting to hear from her because she was late to meet up? The police never verified his alibi that he was at work when Hae disappeared. However, when the private investigators got his timesheets from that day, it showed that the time for his work that day was manually put into the system, not a live clock in and clock out. And the person who put it in the system, his mother, the manager at his work. It also showed that Don worked at a different LensCrafters that day, one he didn't work at any other time. So why would it say a different LensCrafters? So his usual co-workers wouldn't remember that he wasn't there that day?
I mean, even if he is innocent, all that is super suspicious.
It definitely seemed like he did not have an alibi in him, and his mother felt like he needed to have one.
Mm-hmm. And it does beg the question, what was he doing till 1:30 in the morning? That's weird too.
That is really weird, especially because he was supposed to be with Hae.
And if this is your significant other, like, wouldn't you be wondering where she was?
Yeah, you would think you would be concerned.
Mm-hmm.
What about Alfonso Sellers, the man who found Hae's body? You know how we talked about the impressions that looked like diamonds on Hayes' body? They looked like they could have been made by a concrete shoe that goes on the bottom of a concrete grinder. Alonzo had worked in concrete for many years. Purely coincidental, but it makes you go, Alonzo had to walk 127 feet from his car into the woods to find Hayes' body. And her body had been noted that it was partially buried and very hard to see. How did he happen to walk directly to where she was buried and see her on the snowy, cold ground, partially buried? Why did he go so far into the woods to just use the bathroom? Was he actually there looking for something? Not only this, but Alonzo has a long record, run-ins with the law, including indecent exposure and trespassing on private property. To add to the suspicion a bit more, when Hay was going to Woodland High School, Alonzo lived less than a 5-minute walk to high school. It was basically in his backyard. Another theory is that someone in Hay's family murdered Hay. Shortly before her death, Hay had confided in multiple friends that she was sexually abused as a child. Was she murdered in retaliation for speaking to people about her sexual abuse? Her family was very strict and did not want her dating outside of their race or religion. Not only did she dishonor her family by dating Adnan, a Pakistani Muslim, but then she went and dated a white man. And Hay was rebelling from her culture, going as far as to say that she didn't want to be a part of it anymore. So, was Hay being punished for her disobedience and something really bad happened? Was it an accident? Of course, the murder of Hay could have been done by a completely random person. Was someone watching her and murdered her when given the opportunity? Was it an opportunity killing? Someone was looking for a young female victim and they happened upon Hay. If you believe Adnan's story that he asked her for a ride on that day, since Jay had his car, but she didn't want to wait around for him, so she left. Then she was alone on her way to get her cousins. Did someone intercept her? Was she murdered by an unknown serial killer? Another much more widely accepted theory is that Jay murdered Hay himself, on his own. Jay, by his own admission, had possession of Adnan's car and cell phone on the day of Hayes' disappearance. Almost every single call made on that phone and every incoming call were from Jay's friends, not Adnan's. No one could place them together on that day except for much later that day in the evening. Does it make sense that Jay spent his entire day going around and being a chauffeur for Adnan? Picking him up, dropping him off at track, picking him up again, etc. If he really was with Adnan all day, why didn't he just leave Adnan with his car? It really doesn't make any sense. Jay is known by almost everyone who knew him to be a compulsive liar and to be someone who can convince you of anything. Did he murder Hay and concoct this story to police to pin the crime on Adnan? If Adnan did miss his ride from Hay, go to the library, then to track practice, then Jay would have had Adnan's car and phone all afternoon and then picked Adnan up again at 6 p.m., which gives him 3.5 hours to apprehend Hay and murder her, which actually gives him more time to commit his crime than the tight 21 minutes that Adnan would have had. So if Jay killed her, what could possibly have been his motive? Why would he do something like that?
Well, it could have been he wanted to murder somebody. You know, some people just have that compulsion, that craving. Or it could have been she knew something about him that he didn't want getting out. He was in a relationship with Stephanie, who was a close friend to Adnan, a close friend to, she was in their group of friends. And did she know something about Jay that he didn't want to get back to Stephanie? You know, that could have been a theory. I've also heard a theory that maybe Jen and Jay were involved with each other romantically. They were super close. They hung out every day. Did Hay know if something was going on between Jen and Jay and was gonna tell Stephanie? Maybe she didn't even threaten to tell Stephanie, but Jay was worried about that.
And maybe she saw something she shouldn't have.
Yeah. Or it did have something to do with his drug crimes. You know, he's a self-admitted drug dealer.
True.
Did she get upset with him about something and threaten to tell the police about his drug dealing, and then he had to stop her? Or was it not even that she threatened him, but he was just scared that she knew something about him? Some people get paranoid.
True. Obviously, those were all guesses, but we do know that you do not need a motive to prove guilt in a murder case. Some people argue that Adnan had to be in possession of his phone at 3:32 because a 2-minute phone call was made to his friend Nisha's home phone. Jay did not know Nisha as a close friend. However, if you were going to frame somebody for murder, how better to make it look like he's with you than to call one of his friends? At trial, Nisha claims to remember the call, but the call she testifies about was a call made from Jay's job, which he didn't start until a few weeks later, proving that Nisha was mistaken about which phone call this was.
And I saw an article that said, like, if Jay wanted to frame Adnan and he called Nisha's home phone, he could have talked to anybody. He could have talked to an answering machine. You know, like, we don't know that he spoke to Nisha for 2 minutes.
Well, also, like, if you call, even if you don't say anything, but you don't hang up for 2 minutes, doesn't it show that you're still connected to them?
Yeah, because the original caller is the one that has to end the call when you're talking, when one person has a landline.
Right. So it's very possible he didn't say anything and they hung up and completely forgot about it because that stuff happened all the time in 1999. But he sat on the phone for another minute and a half, you know?
Yeah, very true.
Another talked about theory is that Jen helped Jay murder Hay. Pretty much the same theory as we discussed, except Jen was involved. How did she know so much so soon about the crime? Why was she so willing to go pick Jay up from the mall parking lot? They both admit to being together a lot, off and on, throughout the day. If Jen wasn't involved, she at least must have known what was going on. And lastly, the theory that Adnan did murder Hay, either how Jay described it or with Jay as an accomplice during the murder. If you believe Jay and the story about the call logs, Adnan and Jay were together for a lot of the day on January 13th, 1999. Now, if Adnan did kill Hay, was it exactly how Jay and the prosecution describe during that 21-minute increment of time? Like we've said, that's really hard to believe. If Adnan did murder Hay, it's much more believable that he apprehended her, put her in the trunk of her car, left her car somewhere where no one would stumble across it, go back to school for track practice, and then murder her sometime later. However, according to her lividity, she would have had to have laid somewhere flat for 10 to 12 hours before being buried, which could not have been curled up in the trunk of her car. Did he lay her flat in the woods, then change his mind and decide to come back to bury her? That would change the timeline entirely and change Jay and Jen's stories about the shovels being dumped at the mall parking lot. Were they confused on the night? Could it have been the next day that this all happened? That actually seems more likely. They have so much going on in a 6-hour time span. Murder Hay, pick Adnan up, go buy weed, go get food, go to track practice, pick up from track practice, go to a friend's house, go bury Hay, dump Hay's car, go to the mall parking lot, and then get to the mosque all by 8 p.m. All while making phone calls all afternoon. It's a lot to get done. There's a lot to point to Adnan's guilt, such as he was Hay's most recent ex-boyfriend, and she moved on so quickly. Adnan cannot account for his movements on the day of her disappearance, no matter how much he thinks about it. If someone very close to you goes missing on a certain day, you'd think that he would probably remember that. He was someone Jay admitted to being an accomplice, implicating himself in the process. Adnan's cell phone pings at Lincoln Park the night of her death, if the ping is correct, which it could not be. On a breakup letter from Hay to Adnan, he wrote, "I'm going to kill" on the back of it. Who or what is he going to kill? That is a really weird thing to have written on the note, though.
I know, and I hadn't heard that before, and then I looked it up, and it's true. She wrote him several, she wrote him letters all the time, because they're at high school, and that's what you do.
In 1989,
anyway, on the back of it, there was one written in, like, big letters, like, "I'm going to kill." So, I mean, maybe it's possible somebody else wrote that. I don't know why you would write that unless you were like trying to frame him or something, but it on the back of a breakup letter from Hay, it does say "I'm going to kill" on the back of it.
That's very bizarre, and also it's bizarre that it kill who or what.
Yeah.
Why is the sentence not finished?
Mm-hmm.
Some of Hay's journal entries talked about Adnan not wanting to break up, and there were points that she was afraid of him and felt threatened by his behaviors. Lastly, Adnan claims that he and Jay were not close and they were more acquaintances. But if this is true, why were they together so much, going to parties together, etc., if they weren't close? And then why would Adnan lend his car and his cell phone to Jay for a whole day? It doesn't make sense. And I've actually always thought that. I've always thought it was weird that he says we weren't very close, but I gave him the 2 most expensive things that I own.
Yeah, I've always kind of thought that that's BS. Like, Jay was kind of an outsider. Everybody thought he was kind of weird. He, hung out with people that maybe weren't on the up and up. And Adnan had this like tight group of friends at school that were kind of like, like goody goodies, for lack of a better word. Like everybody, went to school and they did what they were supposed to do. And maybe he was embarrassed that he was close friends with Jay or something. And so he says that we weren't close. But I don't buy for a second that Jay and Adnan weren't close.
Yeah, it really just doesn't make any sense. Like, especially when you're a teenager and you just got a brand new cell phone and you have your own car and you just give it to somebody you don't even really know that well.
He could have, if he was so worried about Jay getting a gift for Stephanie's birthday, which is the whole reason why he lent him the car, he could have gone with him that evening after track practice. So it's weird that he lent him his car for the whole day. Like, that still doesn't make any sense to me, especially because he said they went to the mall together in the morning when Adnan had free period. So if they went to the mall together...
Yeah.
And then they go back to school.
Yeah.
Couldn't he have dropped Jay off at Jen's house on the way back to school and had his car with him?
Yeah.
Like, there's something we're missing here.
There is something weird there. I don't think that it is enough to get a guilty conviction for murder, but there is still something about that story that doesn't make sense.
There's a part left out. If Adnan is guilty, which we don't know if he is or isn't.
Yeah.
Like we've said, what the prosecution said happened didn't happen. In my opinion, the only way it makes sense is if he and Jay conspired together and Jay is actually the one that carried out the crime. Or he, like we said a few minutes ago, did get a ride from Hay and put her in the trunk of her car, but she was alive at that time. Because it doesn't make sense that you would kill her when you only have 6 minutes, when he had all evening to do it.
Yeah, but obviously somebody had to have apprehended her between the time she left school before she got to the next school.
Yeah, so the only way that happened, if Adnan did it, is if he did get a ride from her.
But there's nothing that proves.
But there's no eyewitnesses. There's no record of him being with her at that time.
I think we can agree that from a legal standpoint, Adnan Syed should not have been found guilty of the murder of Hae Min Lee. There is just too much reasonable doubt for a conviction and way too much evidence that could show somebody else could have committed this crime. However, can we say for sure he is innocent? No. Adnan very well could have murdered Hae. We just don't know. But which theory makes the most sense to you?